She showed up with cameras. He showed her the door. In a stunning royal showdown, Prince William reportedly asked Meghan Markle to leave a private tribute event honoring Princess Diana, after discovering she brought an unauthorized U.S. media crew to film what was supposed to be a sacred, off-camera ceremony. Tensions boiled behind palace walls. Secret footage may have been captured, and insiders say this was the final straw. Why did Meghan risk everything on this night? What did William say to her face-to-face? And is this the moment that finally destroyed any hope for reconciliation? Stay with us. We're breaking it all down. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The room was supposed to be filled with quiet reverence. Every detail of the Diana Legacy Awards ceremony had been curated with love and care, from the elegant floral arrangements imported from Kensington's gardens to the acoustically tuned music softly echoing Princess Diana's favorite compositions. This was not a gala or a red carpet affair. It was a sacred tribute to a woman whose influence still ripples through modern history. The guest list had been personally reviewed by Prince William himself, not only as the eldest son of Diana, but as the symbolic guardian of her legacy. For William, this ceremony was not just another royal engagement, it was deeply personal. The air inside the royal venue carried a weight of solemnity. Guests arrived dressed in respectful tones, with photographers instructed to remain at a respectful distance. No flashes, no shouting, no crowding. This event was a haven of dignity, meant to honor Diana's memory in the quiet manner she would have appreciated. Through humble stories of community heroes, youth leadership, and silent but transformative charity, no part of it was intended for spectacle. But as Meghan Markle stepped out of her vehicle with her signature poise, she brought something that immediately disrupted the entire atmosphere: cameras. Not the traditional media pool assigned to provide official royal coverage, but an unknown American crew. They weren't dressed as tourists or guests. They had purpose, precision, and to palace insiders, their presence set off a 5-alarm fire. It was subtle at first. A small, compact production team quietly unloading gear from the second vehicle that had followed Meghan's. At first, aides assumed it was a mistake or an unrelated technical crew assigned elsewhere. But then a long-lens microphone was spotted being attached to the edge of Meghan's chair. A light boom tucked discreetly behind the flower arch. And most glaringly, one crew member was heard discussing scene flow and emotional capture timing. What had just happened? To the untrained eye, it might have looked like just another celebrity appearance. But within royal circles, where trust is currency and discretion is law, this was an unforgivable breach, especially considering what the event was: the spiritual continuation of the Princess of Wales' legacy. Sources later confirmed the crew was loosely affiliated with Netflix, the same streaming giant behind the controversial Harry and Meghan docuseries that rattled Buckingham Palace months earlier. This was not random. This was calculated. And within minutes of Meghan's arrival, the tone of the event shifted dramatically. Palace aides were swift. They approached Meghan quietly but firmly, informing her that filming of any kind had not been authorized. Meghan reportedly pushed back, stating that the footage was intended as part of a tribute to Diana and the inspiration her legacy has had on women of color, young leaders, and global changemakers. Her argument, it seems, was not just that the cameras were appropriate, but necessary. But Prince William didn't agree. By the time he was informed of the incident, William had already given an opening address to the intimate crowd, where he spoke movingly about his mother's compassion and strength. His speech was meant to close a chapter of grief and open a path to service. Learning that Meghan had allegedly weaponized the event for media content triggered something visceral in him. According to multiple insiders close to the Duke of Cambridge, his reaction was immediate and severe. He viewed the act not merely as disrespectful, but as a betrayal of trust. After all, Meghan was not an invited speaker or a presenter. Her attendance was already viewed as sensitive, given the strained relations with the family. But William had reportedly allowed her presence as a gesture of goodwill and peace. What he hadn't permitted, what he never imagined, was the turning of a sacred event into what many in the palace later described as a content harvest. The decision to ask Meghan to leave wasn't made lightly. William, we are told, requested a quiet moment with her backstage. What was said during that conversation remains closely guarded, but several accounts suggest it was tense, emotional, and final. Meghan, caught off guard, allegedly tried to explain that the documentary team was merely collecting reaction shots and not staging any scenes. But William, firmly committed to preserving the sanctity of the moment, told her, "This is not about Brand. This is about our mother." Minutes later, the crew was seen leaving. No statements. No explanation. Just silence. Meghan, still composed, exited shortly after. A few attendees whispered that her eyes glistened with what appeared to be tears. Others say she wore a look of defiance, not remorse. The crowd was confused, and whispers filled the halls. But one thing was clear. Something had erupted beneath the polished exterior of the royal machine, and it would not stay quiet for long. In the hours following the incident, palace sources scrambled to contain the narrative. Royal communications staff released a carefully worded statement emphasizing the privacy of the event and the importance of maintaining a respectful environment. No names were mentioned. No accusations were spelled out. But the subtext was unmistakable. And then the media storm began. British tabloids, always on high alert for Sussex-related drama, leapt on the story with headlines that painted Meghan as a self-serving intruder who hijacked a solemn tribute for personal gain. Phrases like royal sabotage and Diana disrespected began trending online. Social media fractured along the usual lines. Supporters of Meghan claimed she was being scapegoated again by a rigid and outdated institution, while defenders of William argued that she had crossed a line that even Harry would not have dared touch. In the United States, the coverage was gentler. Talk shows speculated that Meghan may have misread the event's tone. Cultural critics questioned whether the British establishment had ever truly accepted her, and whether this incident was just another example of her being set up to fail. But behind the scenes, sources say William was unmovable. To him, this was not about race, nor media bias, nor PR. It was about something more elemental, honoring his mother in a way that she would have recognized and approved of. Quietly, with purpose, without spectacle. And this incident did more than reopen wounds between the Sussexes and the royal family. It confirmed a growing sense within the institution that reconciliation might be a fantasy. The fact that Meghan reportedly brought the Netflix crew without prior approval was not viewed as a misstep. It was seen as a premeditated act, a choice. If the monarchy is built on symbolism, this incident may go down as one of its defining images, a future king protecting his mother's legacy by drawing a boundary, not just between public and private, but between inclusion and exclusion. As the public digested the scandal, comparisons were drawn to the past. How would Diana herself have responded? Would she have welcomed the spotlight to champion her causes? Or would she have recoiled from the idea of her memorial being turned into content? No one can say for certain. But what is certain is this. Meghan Markle's attempt to commemorate Princess Diana on her terms clashed violently with Prince William's vision. And when that happened, the result was not a compromise. It was an ejection. The emotional resonance of the moment cannot be overstated. For Prince William, the ceremony was a tribute. For Meghan, it was perhaps an opportunity to reshape the legacy in a modern light. But for those watching, both inside the palace and across the world, it became something else entirely. A moment that underscored the chasm between two worlds, two philosophies, and perhaps two futures for the royal family. This incident didn't just expose a breach of protocol. It exposed the raw nerves and fragile lines of trust that still fracture the House of Windsor. It showed us how far Meghan is willing to go to control her narrative, and how far William will go to protect his mother's memory. As the footage rolls in silence, with the cameras long gone and the venue now empty, the question lingers in the air like a ghost. Who really owns Diana's legacy? And who just lost the right to claim it? The cold evening air carried a sharpness that night, the kind that cuts through fabric and stiffens one's posture into an unintentional formality. Guests began arriving in sleek, chauffeur-driven vehicles. Limousines rolled slowly along the gated drive leading to the private royal estate where the Diana Legacy Awards were to be held. The location was intentionally modest, one of Princess Diana's favorite venues that evoked not grandeur, but warmth. It was a place tied to service, memory, and compassion. Every guest had been briefed ahead of time. There would be no red carpet, no fanfare, and certainly no press inside the premises beyond a single, unobtrusive royal pool photographer. This was not to be another public-facing royal function. This was an internal moment, a family remembrance cloaked in ceremony. A whisper, not a shout. Yet, just as the final guests were settling in, and staff had begun ushering people inside to find their assigned seats beneath the chandeliers of the oak-paneled main hall, a shift occurred. It began with the simple sound of a luxury vehicle pulling up to the curb. There was no announcement, no formal roll call. But as the doors opened, all eyes turned toward the black Range Rover with tinted windows that seemed to idle for just a moment too long. And then Meghan Markle stepped out. She looked immaculate. Every detail seemed calculated. The neutral tones of her dress suggested an effort to appear subdued, yet the silhouette, the tailoring, the subtle shimmer of her accessories made it impossible not to notice her. It wasn't just her fashion. It was the aura. There was something unmistakably stage-managed about the way she paused at the door, glanced toward the gathering crowd, and smiled faintly, like a performer who knew the cameras were rolling. But the moment turned from curious to alarming in an instant. Behind her, not one but two individuals exited the second vehicle that had quietly tailed hers. They weren't dressed like guests. One wore a padded vest with audio equipment strapped beneath it. The other carried a long bag, from which a tripod and camera emerged. As they began unloading, a royal aide posted at the entrance began walking toward them, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. He asked, politely at first, for identification. The two men hesitated. One muttered something about being pre-cleared. The other showed a badge, unofficial, unbranded, and certainly not one issued by the palace. That's when the aide turned, and within seconds a security team was notified. Inside the venue, most guests were unaware of the stir outside. But those manning the check-in desk noticed Meghan's team diverging from the standard path. A staff member attempted to engage the group in a side conversation. Meghan reportedly brushed it off with a polite but firm statement. "We're just here to capture a few background shots, nothing formal." That answer, however, only raised further alarms. In the royal world, protocol is absolute. There are no gray areas when it comes to media access. Every camera, every light, every lens must be cleared, cataloged, and stationed in designated zones. That's how the institution controls its image. That's how dignity is preserved. The presence of an unsanctioned crew was not a minor oversight. It was a red flag waving in the face of tradition. Security personnel intercepted the crew and began asking more pointed questions. Who had hired them? What was their directive? Who had authorized their presence? The answers were vague. One member said they were there on behalf of the Duchess. Another claimed they were freelancers collecting B-roll for archival content. But none could produce formal credentials. What happened next became the first ripple in what would soon become a media tsunami. Guests seated near the front entrance noticed a subtle commotion. Two aides in dark suits huddled near a private hallway entrance. One appeared to be speaking through an earpiece. Meghan, at this point, was already inside, mingling quietly with several guests, none of whom seemed aware of the brewing problem just steps away. The camera crew, however, had been stopped at the threshold, and they weren't being let in. According to an eyewitness account later published in a royal-adjacent blog, one of the guards was heard saying flatly, "They're not on the list." The phrase echoed. It wasn't just about event planning. In royal terms, it meant exclusion, denial, not just of entry, but of privilege. Back inside, the tone had shifted imperceptibly. Meghan had taken her seat, positioned respectfully near the rear quarter of the room. She appeared calm, possibly unaware that anything unusual was unfolding outside. But within minutes, the room's energy changed again. Prince William had entered. He wore a classic tailored suit with a dark tie and carried an expression that was visibly strained. Staff described his arrival as brisk. He greeted several guests with warmth, but it was clear to anyone watching that something was weighing on him. After a short exchange with one of his senior aides, William was escorted to a private side hallway. Sources suggest that's when he was informed of the incident, of the unauthorized crew, the equipment, and the unclear intent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show emotion. But those who saw him in that moment described his eyes as sharp and cold. Back in the lobby, the crew had begun packing up. A low voice, possibly from a communications staffer, was overheard warning them not to record anything further. One of the individuals attempted to push back, claiming they were acting under Meghan's direction and that she had full approval. "No, she doesn't," came the response. "Not for this." And with that, the cameras were zipped away. Lenses were disassembled. Wires coiled. It was over, at least for them. But for Meghan Markle, the consequences hadn't yet reached her. She sat inside the hall, among award recipients and family members of the honorees. If she knew the crew had been denied access, she didn't show it. Her expression remained composed, her posture gracious. Some saw her as elegant. Others whispered words like calculated. The real explosion was yet to come. But even in that moment, before the confrontation, before the press got wind of the scandal, before William would make his move, the signs were clear. This was no ordinary arrival. This was a strategic act that collided head-on with the traditions of the crown. The red carpet may not have been rolled out, but something had been rolled in, a quiet defiance of royal control. A gesture that turned one of the most solemn moments in the royal calendar into a theater of hidden lenses and blurred boundaries. Meghan Markle hadn't just arrived at the Diana Legacy Awards. She had arrived with a message, with a team, and with an intent that no one at the palace had approved. And in the world of royalty, intent without permission is a declaration of war. As guests began to settle into their seats, a subtle but unmistakable change rippled through the room. What had begun as a tranquil and reverent evening slowly started to feel electric with unspoken tension. The air grew heavier, not because of any overt disturbance, but because of what was happening in the corridors just outside the formal gathering. The calm before the storm had started to fracture. Behind the scenes, staff were buzzing. Conversations whispered in clipped tones. Text messages fired off between aides like a covert emergency protocol. Meghan Markle's unauthorized media crew may have been quietly escorted away, but the implications of their attempted access had not been contained. It was spreading like smoke beneath a sealed door, impossible to see but undeniably real. Two senior staff members stood just beyond the curtain of the main entrance to the event hall, reviewing their notes while their eyes darted anxiously toward the crowd. They weren't looking at guests anymore. They were looking for signs that the event had gone off course, signs that word of the disruption might be leaking into the seated audience. Royal events function like theater, where everything is prearranged, rehearsed, precise. But this was no longer following the script. Prince William hadn't yet returned to the main hall after being informed about the Netflix-affiliated crew. Inside, the absence of the host was beginning to be felt. Some guests noticed. A few exchanged polite smiles laced with curiosity. Others assumed it was simply a delay, an extended greeting, perhaps, or a moment of preparation before his formal re-entry. But the truth was far more explosive. In a side corridor behind the velvet-draped stage, William stood with his arms crossed. 3 advisors flanked him, one of them the same aide who had intercepted the unauthorized camera crew. Another held a printed guest list with a red pin note, "No private filming approved." William's eyes were fixed on the paper, unmoving. What were they trying to record? He asked flatly. Her entrance. Audience reaction. Possibly candid moments during the speech. Nothing in the crew's setup suggested still photography. It was full video, high-end, directional audio too, one of the aides explained. It looked like docu-style filming. William didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence was sharper than reprimand. It wasn't just the breach of protocol that bothered him. It was the symbolism. This was a night meant for Diana. For the young people carrying forward her legacy of compassion and justice. For the families of honorees who had spent months preparing emotional tributes and speeches. It was not a backdrop for a future Netflix episode. Meghan's attendance had already required delicate handling. Though the palace had not formally invited her, she had been granted access due to family deference. A quiet nod from behind the curtain. It was understood she would attend without fanfare, sit respectfully, and avoid press attention. But now, all those conditions had been violated. Back in the event hall, the speakers were preparing to begin. The sound technicians were checking final levels. Award recipients were reviewing their speeches with trembling hands. At the rear of the hall, Meghan sat with a composed smile. Those seated near her remained polite, some were cautiously friendly, others observant. No one confronted her directly. But more than one attendee noticed something peculiar. Meghan frequently glanced toward the entryway, as if waiting for a cue or signal. She didn't know it yet, but that signal was never coming. The internal royal communication channels were now in full swing. The head of security had already reviewed the surveillance footage. The Netflix crew, they confirmed, had not only attempted to film without clearance but had also tried to place a hidden microphone setup near the central aisle, a move that was interpreted as an effort to capture live dialogue during the awards ceremony. A call was placed to the Lord Chamberlain. The message was brief. A serious breach had occurred and would require immediate guidance. In the control booth, where lighting and audio-visual elements were managed, staff were on edge. Meghan's presence had complicated everything. The tech director asked, should we avoid showing her on the main screen during the ceremony? A simple question, but it carried the weight of a diplomatic crisis. The answer, after a brief consult, Yes, focus the cameras away from that section of the hall entirely. The ramifications were stacking up faster than anyone could contain them. Meanwhile, William made a decision. He wouldn't allow the incident to overshadow the ceremony. The awards would proceed. The young recipients would still be honored. But Meghan's continued presence at the event was now untenable. Not because of gossip, not because of history, but because of action, an action that threatened the spirit of the event itself. The staff put together a quiet plan. Meghan would be asked to step aside privately and respectfully. No announcement, no public confrontation. Just a quiet moment backstage where the message would be delivered directly by William. No intermediaries. No spin. Inside the hall, the ceremony had begun. The first Youth Award recipient was invited to the podium. The crowd clapped. The speech was heartwarming, a story of resilience, of overcoming homelessness and finding purpose through service. The kind of story that Diana herself would have championed. Meghan applauded, but her clapping was not returned by all. Not everyone was smiling anymore. Several guests had begun to hear whispers, small talk between aides, secondhand knowledge of something having gone awry. The harmony of the evening was disrupted, and even if the full truth hadn't spread yet, the atmosphere had unmistakably changed. One attendee, a charity founder seated 2 rows ahead of Meghan, later described the feeling in an interview. It was like there was a leak in the room. Not a sound, but a pressure. You could feel something was broken. Backstage, William prepared to make his move. He adjusted his tie, handed off his phone to an aide, and walked alone through the back corridor that led to the side entrance of the event hall. The moment had arrived. He would not confront Meghan in front of cameras or crowds, but he would confront her. The staff by the door gave him a nod. Meghan was seated, still smiling politely. William motioned discreetly to an usher who approached Meghan and leaned in. A few words were exchanged. Meghan stood up. The entire row shifted as she moved, stepping gracefully through the aisle. Some heads turned. A few whispered. Others avoided eye contact. Meghan followed the usher through the side door and out of sight. Those left in the hall now sat in a kind of suspended attention. The ceremony continued, but the room's focus had divided. On stage, honorees shared powerful speeches and received their awards. Off stage, something else had begun, something less graceful, something unspoken. Staffers exhaled when Meghan was finally out of the room. It wasn't that they wanted her gone, they just wanted order restored, protocol reasserted, calm reestablished. But no one could deny it. The damage had already been done. The soundproof walls of the private corridor seemed to absorb more than just sound. They absorbed pressure, breath, and time. The outside world was just feet away. Guests sat in folding chairs beneath chandeliers, applauding young changemakers whose lives had been shaped by the legacy of Diana. But inside this side room, where a velvet curtain shielded royal affairs from public eyes, something far more personal was unfolding. Meghan stood beside a wall adorned with framed photos of past Diana Legacy Award recipients. She folded her hands before her, expression unreadable. No camera crew followed her now. No advisors at her side. The silence was tense, the kind of silence that hangs over 2 people not sure which version of truth the other will defend. Then the door opened. Prince William stepped inside with the force of a storm barely held in check. His steps were deliberate, composed, but his eyes told a different story. They weren't filled with anger as much as betrayal. Betrayal and something else, exhaustion. The kind that builds over months of fractures, half-healed wounds, and repeated trespasses that never seem accidental. He didn't greet her. Meghan didn't smile. For a moment, the only thing that moved was the sheer curtain swaying gently in the draft. Then William spoke, low, sharp, unfiltered. Why did you bring them? His voice wasn't raised, but it hit like a slap. Not theatrical, not performative. Just cold. Meghan, still composed, responded evenly. They weren't here for the ceremony. Just a few moments. A tribute piece. That's all. William stepped closer, closing the space between them. Not menacing, but assertive. A man whose patience had been stretched beyond breaking. That's not your decision to make. This wasn't your event. This was for Mom. You knew that. You know that. Meghan shifted slightly but held her ground. I wanted to highlight what this means for people who never knew her. People who see themselves in her kindness. In her courage. I wasn't trying to hijack anything. I was trying to honor her. In my way. William's jaw tightened. The mention of honoring Diana, in any way he didn't approve, felt like theft. You don't get to rewrite what she stood for just because it fits a documentary format, he said. This isn't content. This is sacred. For a split second, Meghan's calm cracked. Her eyes flickered with something. Was it disbelief? Hurt? She looked directly at him now, no longer diplomatic. And what about the people she helped, the causes she championed? You think those stories should stay buried because they make you uncomfortable? William's reply was instantaneous. No. I think those stories should be told by the people who lived them, not packaged for algorithms, not filmed like a TV drama without permission. That last word, permission, hung in the air. It was the crown jewel of the monarchy. The reason the entire institution hadn't collapsed under the weight of modernity. Permission was everything. And in William's eyes, Meghan had violated it for the last time. She stepped toward him then, lowering her voice. I didn't do this to undermine you. You did it anyway, he snapped back, voice sharper now. You didn't ask. You didn't clear it. You showed up, cameras in tow, and expected us to accommodate the story you wanted to tell. A pause. Is that what this has always been about? He asked, quieter now. Telling your version of everything? Meghan's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but pain. No. It's about being erased. About not being allowed to exist in this family unless I follow rules no one else has to follow. I've always admired your mother. Maybe more than you know. William's face shifted, his restraint slipping for a second. You admired her, he repeated. Then you would have known this night wasn't about you. It never was. The silence between them was heavier now. Behind that curtain, the world still turned. The awards were being presented. Laughter echoed faintly. Guests clapped. The illusion of calm remained intact. But inside this room, a confrontation years in the making had reached its boiling point. William took a breath and looked toward the door. I won't make a scene. You're leaving. Quietly. And if I don't? He looked at her now, not with hatred, but finality. Then I will. And I won't be silent next time. There it was. The line in the sand. Drawn by a son who had watched his mother's memory used, over and over, by people who claimed to love her. By institutions. By charities. And now, by family. Meghan said nothing. She looked past him for a moment, as if imagining a different outcome, a different world. One where this confrontation never happened. One where the cameras had been accepted, where the tribute would have gone viral, and she'd be seen crying alongside young honorees as a symbol of modern compassion. But that world didn't exist. Not here. Not with him. William turned and opened the door. Outside stood the same aide who had escorted Meghan into the venue. A silent nod passed between them. Meghan followed, back straight, chin high. Not defeated, but done. She didn't say goodbye. William didn't look back. The moment had passed. The line had been crossed. And the cost was now written into the unspoken history of the monarchy. The door shut behind them. Back in the ceremony hall, an award recipient gave a moving speech about a mother lost to cancer, about finding strength in her memory. William stood beside the stage, ready to return and deliver his next remarks. But for a second, his hands trembled. It wasn't from nerves. It was from grief, not for his mother, but for what her memory had become in the hands of others. The side hallway leading from the private discussion room back to the ceremony's outer periphery was long and unnervingly quiet. The polished wooden floor beneath Meghan's heels produced an echo that sounded louder than it should have been, like a drumbeat marking the closing of a chapter. Behind her, the door where Prince William had confronted her now stood shut, muffling everything that had just transpired into the pages of unspoken royal history. A palace aide, young, clean-shaven, visibly tense, walked 2 steps ahead, leading the way as though this were any routine change of plan. But it wasn't. This was a dismissal, however softly dressed. Outside the hall, royal staff had been briefed discreetly. Word traveled swiftly in institutions as old and tightly structured as the monarchy. Even those who hadn't heard the full story understood enough. Meghan was being quietly removed. There was no need for announcement. The body language, the guarded faces, the sudden tightening of logistics, all of it said everything without saying a word. As Meghan exited through a side archway, a member of her own team, clad in a minimalist black suit, was waiting near the coat check hallway. He didn't look surprised, just braced. She gave him a glance, short and knowing, and continued walking. A black car had been summoned. It was waiting quietly behind the estate's rear gate, a separate route from where the main guests had arrived earlier. No press had access to this wing of the building. No lenses captured the moment she left. No camera crew, no dramatic exit. Just a vehicle, an open door, and silence. She stepped inside without a word, and the door clicked shut behind her. For those still inside the event, the ceremony continued uninterrupted. William had returned to the main hall and delivered a brief but emotionally resonant speech praising the recipients and speaking of his mother's enduring values, compassion, dignity, and selflessness. The audience applauded, perhaps not knowing that less than 20 minutes earlier, their host had issued a personal command to remove his own sister-in-law from the premises. In many ways, the show went on. The flowers remained fresh. The sound system worked perfectly. The honored guests, many of them teenagers and young activists, smiled with humble disbelief as they accepted their awards. Photographers took respectful snapshots. Dignitaries clapped. The legacy of Diana, at least in that curated space, remained intact. But behind the scenes, the effects of what had just happened were being measured in hushed phone calls and terse conversations. Meghan's team had already begun communicating with their stateside PR firm. The phrase unplanned exit was used in early emails. Someone from the Netflix group had reportedly been waiting in a car outside, expecting to be briefed later about what footage, if any, had been captured before the disruption. One source close to the production later said, "The crew was there to capture a single angle, something emotional, something intimate. It was never meant to go this far." But within royal protocol, there is no room for that kind of creative latitude. No leniency exists when sacred memorials are concerned. William's decision, though abrupt, was consistent with a long-held rule in the House of Windsor: control is not optional. It is the framework that holds the entire facade in place. As the awards ceremony concluded, many of the guests began to sense that something had gone wrong. A few had noticed Meghan's absence. More than one high-profile attendee asked quietly whether she had simply left early. Aides responded uniformly. The Duchess had a scheduling change and needed to depart. No further details were provided, but some weren't convinced. She looked unsettled when she left, one guest recalled afterward, like someone who didn't get the ending she expected. Another said, "There was tension. Even from where I was sitting, you could tell something had shifted." Back at the palace's press office, the damage control machine was already humming to life. A preliminary statement was drafted, vague, cautious, and pointedly apolitical. It read, "Tonight's Diana Legacy Awards celebrated young leaders and activists from around the world. The event was held in private out of respect for the families and individuals honored. All attendees were expected to comply with these protocols. No names were included. No accusations. Just a line in the sand." But in the age of digital speculation, silence doesn't prevent stories, it accelerates them. Social media picked up the whispers almost instantly. Within hours, hashtags began trending. Diana drama, royal fallout, and Wills versus Meghan were among the most popular. Influencers and gossip columnists posted speculative breakdowns based on facial expressions, guest seating arrangements, and the conspicuous absence of any photographs showing Meghan at the event. Online forums lit up with theories. Some accused William of being territorial, others painted Meghan as a repeat offender of protocol. There were rumors that Harry, who had not attended the event, had been blindsided by the fallout. One insider claimed he had received a call from Meghan within moments of her departure, her voice tight with emotion, not rage. She said she never meant for it to be a confrontation, the source claimed. She thought she was contributing to the memory of Diana, not contaminating it. But the royal family operates in a world where perception outweighs intention. Back at the estate, once the last guest had departed and the lights were dimmed, William remained in the main room alone. Staff had cleared the tables. The floral centerpieces stood untouched. He walked slowly to the front, stopping before the stage where honorees had received their awards. His eyes drifted to the chair where Meghan had sat earlier that evening, now empty, its presence still lingering like an unfinished sentence. He didn't speak. He just stood there. To him, the decision to ask Meghan to leave wasn't personal. It was protective. The moment her camera crew attempted to convert grief into content, he saw it as a line being crossed, not just in protocol, but in memory. The memory of his mother, who had lived most of her life under the microscope and died because she couldn't escape it. Perhaps that was the root of it all. To William, this wasn't about scandal or rivalry. It was about keeping one promise, that no one would ever again exploit Diana's memory for headlines, even if the person doing so claimed to be honoring her. The irony, of course, is that both sides believed they were preserving her legacy. Meghan wanted to share it with a global audience, believing her perspective, her narrative, had merit. William wanted to protect it, keeping it out of the spotlight, reserving it for those who knew the woman behind the image. And so, in the end, Meghan left in silence. No confrontation in front of guests. No official fallout. But what happened in that side hallway, the confrontation, the dismissal, the cold parting, would echo beyond that night. Not because of what was said, but because of what it meant. This wasn't just about a media crew. It wasn't even just about Meghan. It was about who gets to own Diana's memory. And on that night, in that quiet room filled with tributes and tears, Prince William made his answer resoundingly clear. By dawn the following morning, the royal estate had returned to a deceptive calm. Staff moved briskly through corridors, floral arrangements from the previous night were being cleared, and the polished floors that had carried both applause and confrontation were scrubbed to a spotless sheen. But beneath that surface calm, something volatile brewed, an internal crisis that now required surgical precision. The palace had long mastered the art of silence. In the face of scandal, the strategy had always been the same. Say as little as possible, control the image, and let the noise burn itself out. But this time, the noise had already taken root. Before official sunrise, social media was on fire with speculation. There were no official statements from Buckingham Palace, no interviews given, yet tens of thousands of people already had an opinion. Inside the communications wing of the palace, red lights blinked across secure lines. 2 crisis briefings had already been held before 9 a.m. Royal media advisors gathered around a table, scrolling through trending hashtags and early press coverage. The incident at the Diana Legacy Awards had not just leaked, it had detonated. And at the heart of it all were 2 names, William and Meghan. Every staff member in the communications war room understood the stakes. This wasn't just a skirmish over an event. This was a narrative war between 2 opposing truths. Meghan's quiet departure, though technically uneventful, had become a blank canvas. Into it, the public had begun pouring wild speculation. Was she expelled? Did she storm out? Was this revenge for the Netflix docuseries? Or a long-building collapse in trust between the brothers? One headline read, Prince William banishes Meghan from Diana event after Netflix infiltration. Another shouted, Royals reignite rift as Meghan filmed inside private tribute. None of the outlets cited palace sources. They didn't need to. The drama was its own fuel. Royal staff knew they had a choice. Deny everything and risk escalating the story, or issue a calculated statement that reaffirmed royal control without stoking the fire. They chose the latter. By noon, a carefully worded press release was published on the royal family's official channels. The Diana Legacy Awards were held in private out of respect for the young honorees and their families. All attendees were made aware of the guidelines for the evening. The Duke of Cambridge expresses his gratitude for a successful event celebrating compassion, leadership, and service. The statement was a masterpiece of subtext. No names. No mention of Meghan. No reference to the breach. Just a reaffirmation of order. But the omission itself was enough to fan the flames. In the absence of clear facts, the public filled in the blanks. Royal watchers and tabloid reporters began digging into guest lists, photographic timelines, and social media posts from event attendees. Some noticed that Meghan did not appear in any official images. Others claimed to have seen her arrive, then vanish. Conspiracy threads emerged. Was her footage already leaked? Did Netflix issue a directive? Had the Queen, though increasingly absent from daily operations, intervened? Inside the palace, William remained resolute. He had reportedly told aides, "This is the last time I'll tolerate a spectacle on my mother's name." His inner circle was brief to say nothing publicly, but to signal his commitment to dignity and legacy if pressed. It was not about a feud, he insisted. It was about boundaries. Meanwhile, Meghan's camp scrambled to get ahead of the narrative. Though her team avoided direct engagement with the British press, insiders say multiple calls were made to US-based PR firms, crafting a strategy to counter what they perceived as deliberate character assassination. By late afternoon, a source close to Meghan provided a statement to a prominent US outlet. The Duchess of Sussex attended the event as a private guest to honor the memory of Diana, Princess of Wales. Any suggestion that her presence was disruptive or unwanted is deeply unfair. No filming took place inside the ceremony. Any assumptions to the contrary are speculation. But the damage was done. The word disruptive had already begun to attach itself to her name. What the public didn't see was the ripple effect inside royal institutions. Security protocols were being quietly rewritten. New clauses were being added to future event invitations, emphasizing media-free zones and pre-approval policies. One internal memo reportedly included a blunt line: no external crews permitted without express written clearance from the principal organizer. Privately, some royal insiders vented frustration. One palace staffer was overheard saying, "We bend backwards to maintain dignity, and then we get blindsided with cameras." Another said, "It's not about her being there. It's about what she brought with her, intentions she didn't declare." Amid all of this, the Queen's private secretary requested a full briefing. Though she no longer managed day-to-day operations, the Queen remained the monarch. And the fact that the incident involved both William and Meghan, two of the most watched figures in modern royal history, meant she needed to be informed. The report submitted to her included a timeline of events: Meghan's arrival, the interception of the crew, William's private conversation, and her eventual departure. It also contained security footage, stills, and statements from staff. The conclusion was clear: protocol had been breached. Whether intentional or accidental remained a matter of interpretation. But within the monarchy, intent often matters less than outcome. Behind closed doors, some began to quietly strategize around a harsher truth. The Sussexes could no longer be trusted in intimate royal settings. Not because of malice, but because their brand, their identity, was no longer aligned with the institution's values of silence and symbolism. It was built on visibility, content, storytelling. And those elements would always be at odds with a monarchy that survives through control and discretion. Meanwhile, media personalities took to television panels to dissect the event. A former royal press secretary told one British news network, "This is the fallout of incompatible systems. One built on tradition, the other built on transparency. Or at least, the illusion of it." Social media was less measured. Twitter boiled with takes. Supporters of Meghan accused the royal family of using her as a scapegoat. Defenders of William praised him for finally standing his ground. American commentators framed it as another chapter in Meghan's public crucifixion. British commentators pointed to a pattern of intrusion. And still, neither William nor Meghan spoke publicly. But silence, in this case, was its own statement. Meghan's absence from future royal events would speak volumes. William's unwavering defense of protocol would harden perceptions of his future kingship. Stoic, unyielding, steeped in order. The narrative was no longer about what had happened in that side hallway. It was about what the incident revealed: that the divide was permanent, that the institution had drawn its lines, that there would be no more indulgence of blurred roles, of royals who wanted both titles and autonomy. As the palace grounds settled into another quiet evening, the Diana legacy plaques still shimmered in the twilight. The speeches had been delivered, the awards handed out, but the night's true legacy wasn't engraved in gold. It was written in silence, in exit routes, in the calculated choreography of narrative control. The story had broken, and neither side would walk away untouched. The following day unfolded like a storm cloud refusing to burst, heavy with static and rumbling with tension from across the Atlantic. In Montecito, California, the morning sun shone with the usual postcard perfection, but inside Meghan Markle's estate, the mood was anything but serene. Phone lines buzzed, advisors assembled, and the polished calm of her sprawling home gave way to something far less curated: damage control. Meghan had not spoken publicly since the Diana Legacy Awards incident. Her team, as trained and PR savvy as any Hollywood outfit, understood the delicate line they were walking. To speak too soon might escalate the conflict. To say nothing might confirm the worst assumptions. But the story was already racing ahead without her. And worse, her name was being written in someone else's ink. From London tabloids to American primetime coverage, the narrative varied, but one theme echoed with unsettling consistency: Meghan had crossed a line. She had breached protocol, offended Prince William, and been asked to leave an event meant to honor his mother. Some headlines called it a royal expulsion, others a quiet confrontation. But all shared one implication: that Meghan had acted selfishly and been corrected. Inside her home, surrounded by staff, Meghan was reportedly calm, but determined. This wasn't the first media firestorm she'd faced. In fact, it was far from the worst. But there was something uniquely personal about this one. This wasn't just a feud with courtiers or press barons. This was about Diana. And in Meghan's mind, she wasn't the villain in this story. She was one of the only people trying to keep the late princess's global legacy alive in a new era. The statement her team drafted was concise, deliberate, and heavily vetted by legal counsel. The Duchess of Sussex attended the Diana Legacy Awards to pay tribute to the late Princess of Wales, whose humanitarian values continue to inspire her work. At no time was any disruptive media activity conducted inside the venue. All footage recorded was obtained in accordance with private documentation agreements and intended solely for educational and charitable purposes. On the surface, it was a controlled response, but every word was loaded. Humanitarian values, educational purposes, documentation agreements. These weren't just talking points, they were shields. Legal protections dressed as public statements. But while the wording aimed to restore calm, the court of public opinion was already in session. Social media dissected every sentence. Critics accused Meghan of deflecting responsibility, while supporters praised her for standing her ground. One viral tweet read, "Of course she honored Diana. She's the only one keeping her legacy relevant for people beyond British tabloids." Another, far more brutal, said, "Diana didn't die for this. She hated the cameras. Meghan knows that." And therein lay the central conflict. To Meghan, media was a tool. To the palace, it was a threat. In private, she reportedly told a close confidant, "The only reason people even care about Diana's awards anymore is because of the public attention I've brought to them. I'm not the problem. I'm the amplifier." That statement, if ever leaked, would have scorched royal bridges permanently. But even in confidentiality, it revealed something raw. Meghan's belief that she had helped modernize and globalize Diana's image in a way the palace never could or would. Her defenders in the U.S. media echoed this sentiment. Daytime talk shows began framing the incident as another example of the British establishment gatekeeping grief. On one major broadcast, a commentator asked, "Why are they so afraid of her cameras? What are they hiding?" But inside the palace, the view was radically different. A royal source close to William later leaked a counterpoint to a British tabloid. It wasn't about cameras. It was about respect. You don't walk into a church with a film crew and call it a tribute. Some places are sacred. This was one of them. That line, "Some places are sacred," began to appear on royal commentary shows, in op-eds, even etched in memes defending William's decision. And so, two narratives emerged. Parallel. In conflict. In one, Meghan was a modernizer, trying to share the spirit of Diana with a new generation through accessible media. In the other, she was a disruptor, capitalizing on royal tragedy to push her brand and dominate headlines. As these interpretations clashed, another figure remained conspicuously absent from both, Prince Harry. Speculation swirled. Where was he? Why hadn't he accompanied Meghan to the event? Why hadn't he defended her publicly? One rumor suggested he'd advised her against filming at the event entirely and was dismayed when she ignored the warning. Another report claimed he had spoken with William privately the day after the ceremony in an attempt to de-escalate the situation. No confirmation ever came. No photos. No statements. Just silence. And in that vacuum, public curiosity turned toward the deeper fracture between the brothers. If Meghan and William had clashed so openly, what did that say about the true status of Harry and William's relationship? Could it ever be repaired? Or was this the final nail in the coffin of reconciliation? Meanwhile, Meghan's team worked to shift the conversation. A series of media-friendly stories were quietly seeded in lifestyle publications and influencer circles. These pieces praised Meghan's charitable work, highlighted her upcoming educational initiatives, and subtly reminded readers of her past struggles with palace hierarchy. One article pointed out that Meghan's foundation had recently donated to a women's shelter in Diana's name, a story conveniently timed to go live 2 days after the awards fallout. It was a move straight from the Hollywood playbook. Reframe, redirect, reclaim. But even the best PR strategies can't erase emotional truth. And beneath all the optics, something unmistakable remained. A woman who had walked into a royal memorial and walked out rejected, unseen, and accused. What made it worse, at least in Meghan's view, was the silence from those she once considered family. No one had reached out. Not Charles. Not Camilla. Not even Harry's cousins, who had previously extended small gestures of warmth during royal events. It was as if the door had closed behind her for good. Back in California, Meghan retreated from the spotlight for a few days. She canceled an appearance at a local charity event. Her publicist told the organizers it was due to a scheduling conflict, but insiders admitted it was strategic. She needed to stay quiet, to let the story settle. Privately, however, she was planning a counter-narrative, one that would recenter her as not the antagonist, but the misunderstood outcast, a woman caught between the past and the present. A woman trying to do good but punished for not doing it the royal way. And that's when the idea surfaced. Not another docuseries, not another interview, but a standalone short-form feature, a personal visual essay on motherhood, legacy, and the meaning of remembrance in the age of media, not framed as a royal production, not even explicitly tied to the Diana incident, but unmistakably designed to deliver one message: that her intentions had always been pure. Netflix executives were reportedly intrigued. The idea was fluid, experimental, low budget, emotionally intimate, and grounded in the very tension that had defined Meghan's journey. A segment dedicated to Diana's humanitarian influence was discussed. Carefully, cautiously. The timing, however, was still too raw. Advisors advised waiting. For now, all Meghan could do was hold her ground and play the long game. Because she understood something her critics often underestimated: public opinion is rarely stable. Today's scandal becomes tomorrow's nuance. And if you can survive the noise long enough, you can reshape it. So she waited. And as she waited, the question that lingered from London to Los Angeles remained unanswered. Did Meghan act with arrogance? Or with reverence? Had she truly tried to honor Diana? Or had she tried to own her? The truth may never be agreed upon. But the fallout, carefully contained as it was, left scars no PR campaign could fully erase. As the media storm churned and the public debated the optics of what had taken place, an unexpected shift in tone began to surface. Not from official palace statements or formal press releases, but from behind closed doors. Prince William's inner circle, long known for their discretion and stonewall silence, had begun to speak. Quietly, strategically, off the record, and every word carried the unmistakable weight of a man who had reached his limit. It began with a leak. Not a scandalous revelation or salacious quote, but a brief, four-sentence comment published in a respected British broadsheet. The article framed it as background information from a senior source close to the Prince of Wales. It read, "Prince William was deeply disappointed by the disruption. This was not about exclusion, but about maintaining the dignity of the moment. The event was sacred. His mother's memory is not to be used for spectacle." Those 4 sentences acted like a key in a lock. Suddenly, the media tone started to change. Where earlier coverage had portrayed the incident as a clash between strong personalities, the new framing positioned William as the emotional center, a son protecting his mother's memory, a guardian of tradition under siege by opportunism. And as more voices emerged from his inner circle, a fuller picture began to take shape. William's aides, some of whom had worked for him since his 20s, spoke with clear intention. One senior advisor, granted anonymity by a major publication, elaborated further. "This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. There's a pattern. Every attempt to build peace has been met with optics-driven theatrics. He's done trying to play both sides. That door has closed." Those words hit hard. They weren't just a reaction to Meghan's filming crew. They were a summary of years of tension, private reconciliation efforts, and emotional whiplash that had slowly turned goodwill into cold resolve. Behind the palace gates, staff shared that William had struggled with the event for weeks before it even took place. The Diana Legacy Awards had always been emotional for him. He reviewed every speech personally, met with each honoree privately. He saw it not as a duty, but as a personal mission to ensure his mother's values endured through action, not publicity. So when he was informed 10 minutes into the event that his sister-in-law had arrived with an external media team, the sense of betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. His voice may have remained calm in public, but according to those close to him, his anger that night was volcanic beneath the surface. He didn't shout. He didn't swear. But the way he looked at us, you knew, one royal aide said. Another recounted that, after the ceremony, William stayed behind longer than usual. Not for interviews, not for press, but to sit in the now empty hall, surrounded by chairs that had been filled hours earlier. He reportedly told one aide she wouldn't have dared do this when Mum was alive. That quote, shared off the record, sparked a firestorm. Supporters of William pointed to it as proof of his emotional stake in the incident. That this wasn't a power play or a personal vendetta, but the boiling point of a man who had endured years of slow provocation, all in the name of maintaining a dignified silence. Critics, on the other hand, accused the palace of weaponizing Diana's memory, using it as a shield against any criticism of the royal family's long-standing refusal to adapt to modern expectations. But within William's circle, the conviction was unanimous: enough was enough. They spoke of previous episodes that had eroded trust. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, the tell-all book deals. And now, this filming inside a sacred family space without clearance. One former staffer put it bluntly, it's not just the cameras. It's the constant rewriting of every story, every event, to center themselves. It's exhausting. It's deliberate. That sentiment extended beyond aides and advisors. Friends of William, individuals who had known him since his days at Eton and St. Andrews, began to weigh in through journalists they trusted. He feels like he's protecting a legacy no one else in that family understands, one friend explained. Diana wasn't a brand to him. She was his mother. This was supposed to be her night, and it became a tabloid circus. Another confidant added, the worst part is, he tried. After everything, he still gave her the benefit of the doubt. And now he's done. Not just with her, but with the whole charade. Those words painted a definitive portrait, not of rage, but of resolve. William, once viewed as the bridge between royal tradition and modern sensibilities, had chosen a side. And it wasn't the side of adaptation. It was preservation. In the days that followed, more subtle signals emerged. Future events organized under William's patronage included tighter language about media access. Private receptions quietly removed the Sussexes from any guest consideration, and security teams were instructed to treat any unauthorized camera equipment as a direct violation of privacy, regardless of who brought it. The media took note. Several commentators observed that, unlike previous royal dust-ups, there was no outreach from William afterward. No olive branch. No back-channel calls. Just silence. Cold and final. The message was clear. This wasn't just about one night. It was a turning point. Behind the scenes, even the Queen's inner circle acknowledged the shift. A senior courtier reportedly remarked during a private meeting, His Majesty has given the prince full autonomy, and he's choosing clarity over compromise. And then came the most telling development of all. Prince William's official office at Kensington Palace updated their communications team's external media protocol. From now on, all engagements involving the late Princess Diana's name would require a double vetting system, one from Palace Communications and one from William's private office. No exceptions, not even for family. That quiet policy change confirmed what many had already suspected. The bridge between the Sussexes and the royal establishment wasn't just cracked. It had been dismantled. Inside Montecito, Meghan's team received the message, though no official response was made. For all the public defense, all the media strategizing, the fact remained unchanged. William's circle had drawn a line, and this time, no one inside it was interested in stepping back across. They had watched too many moments be rebranded, too many tributes turn into trailers. To them, this wasn't palace politics. It was emotional sovereignty. And William, in their eyes, was finally asserting his. What came next would depend on one question. How long could the royal family keep the walls intact before the storm outside found another crack? Because if history had taught them anything, it was that once silence breaks, it never does so quietly. As the world debated, dissected, and devoured the unfolding fallout between Meghan Markle and Prince William, a single, haunting absence came into focus, a silence so complete it felt thunderous. That silence belonged to Prince Harry. In the flurry of statements, leaks, and off-the-record whispers, Harry had said nothing. Not a word, not a post, not even a carefully placed quote from his usual allies. His name was on everyone's lips, but his voice was nowhere to be found. And in the realm of royalty, where silence can speak louder than declarations, this particular silence was loaded. Observers noted it quickly. Journalists began asking, where was Harry? Why hadn't he released a statement defending his wife? Why hadn't he publicly corrected what many believed to be exaggerated or false media coverage? Had he chosen not to engage, or had he simply been shut out? Theories exploded across platforms. Some claimed he was blindsided by the filming arrangement at the Diana Legacy Awards. Others suggested he had warned Meghan against bringing any cameras, and when the fallout came, he chose not to intervene. There were whispers from palace insiders that Harry had reached out to William afterward, quietly, emotionally, and unsuccessfully. But the truth, for most, remained murky. What was certain, however, was that his silence had consequences. For Meghan, the optics were jarring. She had been ushered out of a royal event, accused of breaching protocol, and subjected to a whirlwind of public scrutiny, yet her husband remained mute. Loyal supporters of the couple expressed concern online, wondering whether this signaled a fracture within the Sussex household. She stood alone again. One commentator wrote on social media, "Where was her partner?" Another post, more scathing, accused Harry of being emotionally AWOL when it mattered most. But for those who understood the dynamics of the royal family and the weight of its history, Harry's silence was far more complex than it appeared. Insiders close to his camp suggested that Harry had been put in an impossible position. The event in question wasn't just a royal function. It was a tribute to his mother, Diana, a space already laden with grief, memory, and long-held pain. To publicly side with Meghan would mean directly confronting his brother over something deeply sacred. To remain silent, though, risked looking like a betrayal of his wife. One source close to the Sussexes revealed Harry was devastated. He never imagined it would come to this. He wanted peace. But he also understood William's rage. In private, he's torn. Completely. Those who had followed Harry's journey knew this dilemma all too well. Since leaving royal life, Harry had straddled two worlds, the institution he was born into and the freedom he fought to claim. But at the heart of that struggle was always one thing, his mother's memory. He once said in an interview, "I see my mother's legacy in everything I do." And yet now, that very legacy had become a battlefield between his wife and his brother. The silence, then, was not indifference. It was paralysis. Harry's inner circle, though smaller than William's, was fiercely protective. Friends from his military days, a few trusted American confidants, and members of his Archwell team stood by him, but even they admitted the pressure was immense. "He's afraid anything he says will make things worse," one close friend reportedly said. "This isn't just a PR headache. This is personal. It's about family." And Harry has already lost too much to risk losing what little thread is left. What made the silence even more painful was how public the rest of the drama had become. William's allies were speaking. Meghan's team was spinning. The press was clawing at every pixel of information. And Harry, once the rebellious voice of the younger generation, remained mute. But silence does not mean absence. Behind the scenes, Harry was reportedly in constant dialogue with Meghan. They had returned to California together, away from the noise, the headlines, the judgment. He was said to be shell-shocked and struggling to reconcile his dual identities, brother and husband, prince and outsider, son of Diana and partner of Meghan. A source inside Archwell described him as haunted. He knows what that night was supposed to be. He knows what Diana meant to both of them. And now he's caught in the middle of a narrative he can't control. The Sussexes' communications team remained firm. No public statement would be made. They believed the story would peak and fall on its own. That the longer Harry stayed silent, the less ammunition there would be to continue the conflict. But their belief in silence as a shield came with risk. Across British press outlets, headlines began to frame Harry as aloof or complicit by omission. Royal commentators speculated on his marriage. Was he distancing himself from Meghan? Was he being silenced? Or worse, had he given up the fight? These suggestions enraged Harry's allies. One insider snapped back at the claims, saying he's not weak. He's grieving all over again. Indeed, grief sat at the center of everything. The Diana Legacy Awards had never been a neutral space for Harry. From childhood, he had struggled with the public ownership of his mother's memory. The way her face was plastered on covers, her pain dissected by strangers. The way her name became a currency in every royal scandal. Now, that same name had been used, accidentally or not, in a confrontation that cast his wife as an intruder and his brother as the enforcer. What choice did he have? If he defended Meghan, it would seem like an attack on William. If he defended William, it would seem like a betrayal of Meghan. And if he defended no one, well, that was the choice he ultimately made. Some believe it was the most royal move of all. Say nothing and wait for the storm to pass. But for Harry, silence came at a cost. Privately, friends say he feels lonelier now than ever. That despite building a new life, a new foundation, and a new identity in America, the old wounds still cut the deepest. That even oceans away, he cannot escape the expectations tied to his name. And as the days turned into weeks, and the headlines began to shift to new scandals and fresher headlines, the silence remained. Perhaps it was strategic. Perhaps it was emotional. But it was undeniable. Harry, the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the man who spoke of dismantling generational trauma, the husband who once proclaimed he would do anything to protect his wife, had chosen not to speak. And in doing so, left the world to wonder not just where he stood in the latest royal firestorm, but whether he still knew where he belonged. While headlines raged about family dynamics and royal tensions, another thread quietly began to unravel in the background, one far more technical, but no less incendiary. It involved permits, production schedules, and buried documentation. It didn't command the same emotional pull as a prince's silence or a duchess's exit. But for the palace, it was the thread that mattered most. Netflix. In the hours following Meghan's abrupt removal from the Diana Legacy Awards, the public discussion zeroed in on protocol, optics, and emotional betrayal. Yet behind closed doors, royal advisors weren't merely concerned about reputations. They were reviewing contracts, media policies, and investigating whether their privacy had been illegally breached. It all began with a single question whispered by a palace security official shortly after the incident. Was anything recorded? That question opened a floodgate. The Netflix crew that arrived with Meghan had not worn anything to distinguish themselves as media representatives. Their equipment, while discreet, was professional grade. Directional microphones, stabilizers, compact high-resolution cameras. It was not amateur. And though security had intercepted them before they reached the core of the ceremony, one unsettling possibility remained. Had they managed to film or record anything before being escorted out? Palace IT specialists began scouring the building's internal surveillance footage. Their objective was not just to monitor the crew's location, but to determine whether any devices had been activated while still within the premises. Even a few seconds of footage could constitute a serious breach. Meanwhile, legal teams reviewed the documentation Meghan's team had submitted prior to the event. Every guest had been required to sign confidentiality clauses and agree to the prohibition of third-party recordings. But palace sources claimed that Meghan's RSVP had included an unusual footnote, a vague clause that allowed for non-invasive, private footage captured for future philanthropic documentation. To the untrained eye, it sounded harmless.